Hello, 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 and welcome to the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast. I am so happy that you are joining me today. Today, we are diving into a topic that affects many children, teens, and young adults, social anxiety. Understanding social anxiety, how to recognize it, and how to differentiate it from normal social worries or the social struggles that autistic individuals face is really important for providing the right support. In this episode, we will also explore effective treatment options, particularly focusing on group cognitive behavioral therapy, and discuss what parents and educators can do to help their kids. We are honored to have with us today Dr. Sarah Olivo. Dr. Olivo is a licensed clinical psychologist with over 20 years of experience. She is a staunch believer in evidence-based psychology and has extensive expertise in various forms of cognitive behavioral therapy. As the head of Lumate Academy, her goal is to spread the benefits of CBT to children, teens, and young adults who have less access to these treatments. Join me in welcoming Dr. Olivo to the podcast.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Dr. Olivo, thank you so much for joining us.
Social anxiety, one of my favorite topics.
It's an important topic. I feel like it's one of the questions that we get asked a lot about anxiety in general, and then social anxiety. What's normal? When should we be concerned? How does it differ from other forms of anxiety? So I'm glad to have you here to answer all the questions. So thank you so much.
Sure.
Yeah. Many children and teens experience worry and nervousness. We all do. Experience it in social situations, such as feeling anxious when speaking in class, meeting new people, or attending, birthday parties or other social gatherings. And we know that a lot of times these feelings can be a normal part of growing up. When does the nervousness cross the line into social anxiety? How about we start there?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because I think there are plenty of people out there, kids, young adults, teens, me, where they can feel a little self-conscious if they're in a space with other people or a new situation. They might feel shy, or they might just be slow to warm up. They take their time. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. We know that there's a lot of, sort of wonderful things that can come out of people who take their time and pace themselves when it comes to social situations. I think that when it starts to tip over is, the main categories we look at is how frequently is it happening? Is it happening across all situations? Is it more general? Or we might think, is it really causing a lot of distress for the person or the family? Are things changing? For the young child, a lot of times it's the parents who are holding the distress. They're thinking, oh gosh, is my kid ever going to get to go to a birthday party? And as people get older, they hold on to it a little bit more. And sort of maybe their teenage years, they start to feel the pressure. They start to become more aware of how it's getting in the way of things for them. So that distress that they feel, the person or the family member, and then that sort of lack of ability to do things that a lot of people would be able to do at a certain point. So it's impacting their life in some way. And just oftentimes too, the intensity of it, so if it feels like there's an intense level of fear in a situation, so they're going to the party, but the level of sort of momentum it takes to get them there and cajoling and helping. And, oftentimes that is the case too. So intensity, impairment, chronicity, these are things we look at.
Absolutely. And can you give maybe some examples of situations and what that looks like for a child who might experience, normal worry versus kind of social anxiety?
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, let's take it, age by age, obviously. When someone is little, separation anxiety is a very normative thing to go through because it's a rite of passage. It's a developmental stage. There's lots of theories as to why, but perhaps it's because they're realizing, I can walk away from mom and dad. So it's really safe for me to want to stay close to them now that I have the ability to physically move myself. But, we know for young kids, some separation anxiety is really, really normal. And sort of that shyness and wanting to cling to mom and dad. However, we have people who are in middle school, right? And by the time that they can't really even go to really normative things, a lot of their friends are going to because they have a fear of being embarrassed. And that's really, let's be clear. Let's first of all, I would say, what is social anxiety itself? The core of it is a fear of being judged by others and embarrassed in some way. Okay. So if someone's little and they're kind of clinging to mom and dad because they are scared of a new situation, well, that's not social anxiety, right? That's saying, okay, well, we're feeling a little shy right now because we don't know this person, right? Stranger danger, right? But if you're doing that and you're really needing to stick by a caregiver when you're in middle school, right? When you've had a sense of safe adults and you know some more of that, but you're not able to go to a social event unless you have a safety person with you, for instance, or you're not able to go to a sleepover because you're very fearful of downtime. Sometimes whenever I'm talking to a teenager, maybe like a tween, it's that sort of awkward downtime moments in the hallway, or if they go to a play date, the kind of what to do when there's not an activity happening. They're like, I have to come up with the conversation myself. And it's panic inducing. A lot of other times you'll see people who are walking through the hallways and their heads are down because they can't make eye contact. They're afraid if they make eye contact that someone's going to ask them a question and they'll answer it poorly and then they'll be laughed at. Despite this having not necessarily happened, oftentimes these aren't things that have necessarily been true, but it's just this assumption, this perception of social embarrassment and rejection. So they just go through being a lot lonelier during the day than they would if they felt okay with giving a smile. So even sometimes that facial expression they give is, I'm busy. Don't bother me. I'm closed off. I mean, it goes down to that point. Just their face, their mannerisms are a big fat, don't bother. And they can come across oftentimes as rude. I've had plenty of people who have the reputation for being icy and standoffish and rude, but it's really because they aren't able to put themselves out there.
Right. And it sounds like it's really that fear of being rejected, the fear of being embarrassed, fearing of saying the wrong thing and being then rejected or embarrassed is kind of the hallmark of social anxiety. Is that how you distinguish it from a more generalized? Because we know that there are some kids and teens that feel anxiety in a number of situations, not those that just are observed in social settings.
Right. I mean, so yeah, social anxiety again, and obviously you're going to find times where there's a little bit of a gray area. I don't want to pretend like there's a litmus test and you test it out and it comes out a certain color and that's social anxiety. But right, I think when if the core is, I'm going to be negatively evaluated or embarrassed, then that's clear social anxiety. Now, we do have people, to your point, who have what we call generalized anxiety disorder or just more general fears. And what that means is it tends to be across more than just one situation. They might have social concerns. So people with generalized anxiety disorder, they definitely have sometimes a kind of a worry domain about interpersonal concerns or relationship concerns. Again, this isn't necessarily a black and white issue, but a lot of times people who have social anxiety per se, like that kind of core piece of it, they're really avoiding social situations. They have a hard time engaging in it, or they're experiencing them with a great deal of distress. People who have more generalized worry might be worrying about kind of a test and how well they're doing, and is their teacher going to be mad at them, and what do people think about me? They can be in social situations, but they might perhaps kind of ruminate or dwell on something they said afterwards to be like, did I get it right? I don't know. Did people have fun? So it's not necessarily that core I'm being negatively rejected. It's just like, how am I doing just interpersonally? And that might be a worry that flows really nicely into a performance fear or a health fear or a financial worry that can come up as well.
And that's really helpful because I think sometimes it's hard for parents. Obviously, they're not, unless you're a parent and a clinician, to kind of distinguish between, a social anxiety versus a generalized anxiety. And when it's really those thoughts in a child's head that is contributing to the anxiety, unless you know that there's a fear of being embarrassed or there's a fear of being rejected, it's hard to tell what is leading to the avoidant behaviors, the meltdowns about the birthday party, unless you dig a little bit deeper.
Right. It could be the meltdown about the birthday party is because they didn't get to sit next to the birthday girl, or it could be because they thought that they messed up and did a weird dive at the pool and everyone looked at them the wrong way. I mean, I've certainly had, people who are like, I can't go to dive camp because I don't know how to dive. I'm like, well, no one knows how to dive when they're 6. Like you're not the only one, right? Whereas another person wouldn't want to go because it's hot that day. They don't want to put on sunscreen. I want to give parents a real break because we know for a fact that unless you have a child who's, first of all, able to express what's on their mind, which they're not always able to do, and then they have to be willing and open and have to have an environment that allows for that, parents aren't able to read minds, and they're not always really good at guessing what the issue is. So I oftentimes try to really help parents understand, like, you're not alone in this. Most people can't read their kid's mind, and the child has to be able to explain some level of what's going on for us to really understand that. I mean, the good news is we don't always have to know the exact, thought that's leading to it per se. We can still help them feel better. But yes, I can imagine it can feel like a major conundrum.
Absolutely. And then you also have the case where some kids just have social difficulties, trouble kind of navigating social situations because they don't understand social nuances or can't read cues. And obviously that can contribute to some anxiety. Is it hard to distinguish between a social anxiety and social difficulties related to, for example, autism spectrum?
Sometimes, yes, it can be confusing. I think that autism, again, you're not going to just be seeing the social difficulties. You're going to be seeing things in addition to that really show, it really comes from more of a pervasive issue and social difficulties being just one of those things. I have had people who are so anxious that they can come across really socially unskilled or without social nuance when actually they do have the social skill, but they're almost like little statues, not making eye contact and not speaking. And so you have to address the anxiety to tease out some of these things. But for the most part, if you have somebody who is, we know if you just look at the data, people who just simply have social anxiety actually tend to have better social skills than they think they do. And you can't really tell the difference between them and someone without social anxiety when they're in comfortable situations, right? When they're in comfortable situations, talking to their best friend about ice cream, right? They have very similar social skills. There's reciprocity in the conversation. There's eye contact, those things we look for, kind of the higher level social language that we all have. And so that's just something to know as well. And oftentimes I'm telling people I work with, like, hey, by the way, I see when you talk with me how really funny you are. You've got this great sense of humor. Your questions are really engaging, and I try to explain to them that, like, that's waiting for you to show other people too. I think with autism, something like on the autism spectrum, that you are much more likely to see things like difficulty in situations where people just, I might think it's like ships passing in the night. I have people who are on the spectrum who don't make eye contact. And we also see people on the spectrum who in fact are very social and obviously sometimes aren't reading social cues in a way to kind of back down a little bit for. So they also are going to most likely have other situations, some perseverative behaviors that look and feel a certain way that they can use to self-soothe, or a really specialized interest in something where they're not able to change the topic of conversation from that one particular thing. So you're going to start to see some other things as well with autism.
Right. And that's why having a professional involved in the process of understanding why a child is avoiding certain situations or having meltdowns in certain situations or really struggling socially, a professional can help kind of understand the reasons behind some of these struggles, distinguish between social anxiety, generalized anxiety, or social challenges related to autism. And once we know that this is in fact social anxiety, and a parent makes their way into the office and is now having some kind of an evaluation done, what does the research tell us in terms of how to address it?
So the great news about social anxiety is that there are ways to get help. Sometimes those ways require people to do a little hard work to get there, but not without a lot of support. So one of the most effective treatments we have for social anxiety, especially in teens, young adults, children, is cognitive behavioral therapy. But I want to really be specific here. I want to focus on the B. So we hear people talk about cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT quite a bit. And I know a lot of people have experience or have training in this. And it's not to say that they aren't, well-intentioned, but if someone isn't doing the behavioral aspect of this treatment, and more specifically exposure with social anxiety or social phobia, that you're probably not going to get as much bang for your buck out of the treatment. And then let me describe a little bit about what that could look like. So if you say CBT, if you have listeners who are like, what is she talking about? Really, the quickest way to say that is looking at the thoughts that are keeping people stuck where they don't want to be, and what are the actions that tend to make them stuck as well. So if you have somebody with social anxiety, we already know just by the diagnosis, which is why diagnosis can be really important. We already know that some of the thinking traps they can get stuck in are likely to be skewed towards social threat. We have a lot of studies to show that somebody can go in, and if they go do what they call a functional MRI, which means they're going in and they're looking at the brain centers and they're seeing the threat part of the brain, the part that perceives threat, the amygdala, when is it lighting up? And if you have somebody who has no social anxiety whatsoever, like, ooh, piece of cake, talking to a room full of people, they all go in and they'll look at pictures of threatening situations, and the threat center of the brain will light up. And they'll look at pictures of calm situations, nothing. And they'll look at pictures of neutral situations, and nothing lights up. If you put someone with social anxiety in that same situation, they're seeing pictures of threat that are actually threatening, the threat center lightens up. They're seeing really calm situations, just clearly calm, a beautiful lake and a nice sunny day. Their threat system is silent as can be. But if you show them neutral social situations where it's hard to sort of say if it's necessarily a threatening situation or not, their threat center lights up. So we know that people with social anxiety are experiencing social situations as threatening when they're much more likely to be neutral. So if someone's coming in to work on their social anxiety, we can go ahead and jumpstart, say, we already know some of the things that happen for you. Let us educate you a little bit about this. So you can stop seeing your thoughts as like facts in front of you and start to look at them with a little bit more distance, and to try to challenge them a little bit more. We also want to be able to help them pay attention to relaxing their body so that they can be in situations knowing that they look calmer maybe than they might feel, just taking some breaths, progressive muscle relaxation, etc. But the key is really to say, like, when we are experiencing threat, we are evolutionarily sort of prepped to avoid the situation or escape it. And right now, since you are seeing social situations as threats, you're avoiding all of it, which means you're not learning you can handle it. And you're also not learning that you can even enjoy it over time. So a lot of the work is building a relationship, helping them to understand their anxiety, and then saying, okay, what if we had a magic wand and we could take your social worry away from you? Because no one's in there going to therapy being like, I want to keep this. This is great. What what would your life look like if I had a magic wand and I could take it away? And we use that information to build a series of steps to get them to that place to say, okay, if your goal is to go to prom, hang out with some friends after school because you've asked them to hang out, and to essentially be out of your home 50% more after school than you are now. Really doable goals, right? We can track. How many hours are you in your home now? Okay, we're just going to cut that in half. We're going to see how you can get to prom. We're going to make some steps to get you there. And we're going to go through some steps to be able to have you ask some friends out. And we make a list with them. And then the therapist will sit and coach them through and help them face those moments so that they can get to that spot where anxiety is not, and their social anxiety isn't leading the charge and making their decisions for them.
Before we dive back into our conversation, I'd like to take a moment to thank our Child Nexus sponsor, Pacific Preparatory. Do you need an outside-the-box school option for your child who learns differently or is struggling with mental health? Envision an entire school built for one, tailored exclusively to their needs. Pacific Preparatory has no brick-and-mortar location and no group classes, only completely customized live one-on-one courses for K through 12 students, offered virtually in the comfort of your home. Explore how they could support your child at pacificpreparatory.com. Now back to our conversation. I think that's really helpful for parents who are considering this type of treatment for their child, for their teen, because oftentimes they just don't understand what actually happens in those sessions that address the underlying issue. And having a goal in mind for what you're saying is so important because, again, and it sounds like one child's goal might be different than another child's goal in terms of what they want, in terms of outcome for treating social anxiety.
100%. Some people are like, I have no interest in going to prom. That's not for me. I want to be able to score a goal at the game this weekend, but I hold back because I worry I'm going to miss and then I'm going to get judged, right? So it's really huge to ask them, like, where do you want to go? So it's not cookie cutter.
Right. And absolutely, because for some it might be, I want to be more comfortable in social situations. I don't want to be squirming and feeling this level of distress and in the lunchroom, right? When I have to sit and interact with others, I want people to go to those birthday parties and not avoid them. And it sounds like one of the things you also do is to help them develop better coping strategies, because it sounds like for some people, the anxiety will never go away, but they'll have some better coping strategies. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah. So listen, I think that what I always try to make sure people understand is we actually aren't trying to change who you are as a core person. There might be some things about being slow to warm up, for instance, not jumping in with 2 feet, that you really want to hold true to yourself. I'm not saying this to a 6-year-old, right? We don't know that yet. But especially as I'm working with teens who are trying to build their identity, what I don't want to do is be like, we got to get rid of all of this, and to say, like, there's probably parts of this that are really true to who you are. And we're just trying to kind of peel off the anxiety layers to figure out who that is. And then you can use those longer term goals that you have, sort of the you that you want to be is helping you get through things. So we know for a fact that yes, there are a lot of people who have social anxiety and who they go through treatment and they really are able to overcome it because the situations they're able to practice enough where they see a sense of success and it no longer is as interfering as it could be. I think a lot of times people might just be temperamentally quieter, and that's not a bad thing. A lot of times people are kind of trying to figure out the difference between being introspective. An introvert. I said introspective. An introvert versus an extrovert. I get that all the time. Well, I'm an introvert and I'm an extrovert. Being an introvert isn't a bad thing. Being an extrovert isn't a good thing. So if you're somebody who has social anxiety, but you also are somebody who kind of gets drained by social situations, which is the definition of an introvert, you can say, okay, I'm by someone who no longer struggles with social anxiety, and I still need to help myself pace social situations so that I can make sure my battery is charged. So there are people who can really, what we'd say, when we look at them before the treatment and after the treatment. And several months down the road, we would say they were in remission, that they are no longer experiencing clinical levels of social anxiety. However, I think you and I both know that life is hard. There might be some things throughout life that trip you up, or your social anxiety might be really significant to the extent that you might be struggling with it for years and you're just trying to sort of put one foot in front of the other. So there's levels of social anxiety. And then what we're working on is to say, okay, what are the really important factors that do work for you? Because having a rich and full life, by definition, is doing things that require difficult emotions to happen. Some of the richest things we do in life, whether it's to graduate from school, have a family, have a best friend, by definition, think about those situations, and zero of those are pain-free. If your best friend doesn't call you and goes out with someone else, you feel jealousy. If if you want to have a family and you can't, you feel panic. You might feel a sense of despair. If you eventually have a child, then you might think, oh my gosh, this is exhausting. I'm so tired. So every rich part of life comes with difficulty. So we say, listen, how can we help you cope with anxiety and have coping skills to manage your anxiety? So it's not to say you shouldn't feel it, but you shouldn't act on it necessarily, right? You should avoid things that feel dangerous or aren't part of your goals, but you shouldn't be avoiding things because you're having the emotion of anxiety. That emotion itself isn't dangerous to feel.
Right. And, when you talked about the treatment, the cognitive behavioral therapy to support individuals who have social anxiety and, helping them kind of develop a plan in terms of the things they want to address, a goal that they want to have. Is that in an individual therapy session with the child and a therapist, or is a group program helpful? And how do those differ?
Oh, a group program is so helpful. It's so helpful. Individuals, okay too. And the reason I say that is because, listen, I've been there. I have kids myself. I have talked with so many teenagers, parents of teenagers, tweens, et cetera, or college students, and they just aren't able or ready to do a group. Groups aren't always available in your area, and it can be hard to sort of manage with schedules. That said, if you can find a group and you're willing to do it, it's hugely helpful. And we've seen it be more helpful in many situations than individual. And the reason is because you have people with you to help you practice situations, right? It's not so much about the group dynamic or any of that, as much as it is to say, I have a group of people with me who, if I say I'm nervous about a job interview, I can have someone with me and we can practice together. And I know they're in the same boat and they're not judging me. And I can just sit and have that conversation, not with my therapist, not with my mom in this room or anything like that, with someone else I can just kind of give myself a little bit of like a trailer of what that experience might be. And then the other part is, especially so many times, for instance, people really fear public speaking, but think about, as you get older in your career, and let's start with even little careers, right? The kid who raises their hand in circle time, the kid who raises their hand to make sure that the teacher knows that they have a problem or need to go to the bathroom in elementary school. These are important things to do to be able to assert yourself and talk in public. In middle school, it might be that class participation becomes more part of your grade. And of course, by high school, a lot of times you're doing group projects where there's a public presentation. There's just more that involves letting the public see you and being a center of attention. So if you have a group where you can practice that in a safe way, that mirrors real life much more so than your therapist pretending to be an audience of 15, 15 snarky teenagers, I can play one snarky teenager, but I can't play 15.
And it really feels like that group experience, like you're saying, offers opportunities for real life exposure, right? And in a safe place, because everybody is working on similar goals and similar challenges. So that would be particularly beneficial in terms of generalizability to the real world.
Oh, 100%. I think there's other aspects of it too. First of all, a lot of people worry about privacy, but of course, the group leaders who run these groups are very clear about privacy, and it's just not an issue that comes up. I mean, obviously, it's just not something that I would say is even shouldn't remotely be a concern. And if parents have significant or teens have significant concerns about it, there are ways to address that to make them feel safer. It's not like you go in and are like, "Hi, my name is so-and-so. I live at this address. Here are my socials." Like that's not happening. But also remember, everyone's there for it too. And it becomes a sense of community. Not to say that friendships are always necessarily forged, but certainly a sense of connection is there. And so for people who have social anxiety, oftentimes they feel lonely. They want connection. A lot of times people, for instance, with autism are okay being alone. They aren't necessarily craving attention or connection in that way. They're fine just being sort of in their own mind with their own topics. But people with social anxiety most likely are really craving that connection. And so this allows them to have a sense of community and to help them realize they're not alone, that other kids in this group are going through what they're going through. They're normal kids doing normal kid stuff, and they just have this one hurdle getting in their way.
Absolutely. And so they're building those skills in a supportive environment.
Right. Absolutely. And it's one of the main reasons, certainly the reason I say it's not the only way to do it. And a big part of what people who've done exposures, even before the pandemic, they were out there using Zoom. They were trying to get people in the real world practicing things with support, right? We call it like a bug in the ear. Got a headphone on, you're listening to your therapist. They're saying, okay, you got this. Let's see if you can go and, do this particular exposure. Sometimes it's going and asking someone at the cash register a question, something really simple just to get started. You never make people do something too much too quickly. So there are ways, especially through the ability to do some virtual therapy or teletherapy to get people in the real world. But still, it's still hard to practice that group dynamic and group connection and conversation.
For parents who are on the fence, I've had a lot of parents say, I was a little anxious when I was a kid and I ended up fine. She'll grow out of it. What are the potential long-term impacts of untreated social anxiety?
Right. I mean, I will let me speak to the parents for a second. If you're on the fence, I do know as psychologists, we're biased. We love therapy. We think therapy is great. Everybody could use therapy, but look, it's time and it's money. And also, your teen, if they're not invested, or if your younger kiddo isn't invested, then there might be some work that needs to be done ahead of time. So I do want to speak to that. However, that idea of they'll grow out of it. We do know with social anxiety, that's actually not the case. The trajectory of social anxiety is that it's chronic unless it's managed. And certainly, I wouldn't say if someone's been feeling a little socially anxious because they've gone to a new school and they're struggling to make some friends and something has happened to trigger a little bit of an uptick in their social concerns. A lot of times when I'm talking to families, I'll say I want to get a bird's eye view from the school. What's going on at school? What is the social scenario there? Because if they're being actively socially rejected in some way, then I don't blame them. I'm not gonna have them walk right into school and say hi and sit down at the table if I know for a fact that this is a group of children or students who might not be kind. So I want to be really clear that so much of this, if you're working with somebody who's doing a lot of good work and who's doing exposures with your teen or your young child, or if you're a young adult coming through this, the person's going to really care a lot that they're going to set you up to do something where you experience some success in this situation. And they're not going to put you in situations that are socially dangerous. So if someone is on the fence and they're feeling like it's totally fine, but it's not a new situation, right, that they're adjusting to, give it 6 months. Let's see how it goes. Or they're not in a situation where there's some active stuff that needs to really happen from a school level. Let's get the schools involved. Let's get some advocates for this kid. Then I would say, look, the worst case scenario, if you try it, is that you're like, maybe it didn't help. it probably will, but maybe that's the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario, if you just let it happen, is that they experience a lot of strain and stress and their life is limited for the foreseeable future. So I don't want to pretend like there's no risk because again, it's time, it's money, it's certain things. I always like to say really vet therapists, ask them, talk to them on the phone before you hear about their experience, ask what a session might look like, do those things. I also really like for especially teenagers, I'll say, have them interview me. Have them interview me. Let them have some choice. Because if they have some choice, I think it goes a long way. But yeah, I certainly wouldn't just say they'll grow out of it because the chances if they don't, that's really rough.
Right. And again, it's really for parents to look for some of the things you talked about initially, the frequency of the behaviors, the avoidant behavior or the meltdowns, the intensity, how much it's interfering, and how much of their lives are they not able to live comfortably because of the avoidance of certain situations. And that help determine whether or not treatment is appropriate at this particular time.
Right. I think that a lot of times it makes sense, right? That if someone as a child or a teenager is struggling with social anxiety, there's a big chance that they're a parent or both struggle with it as well. And so I think that that's something where I want to applaud parents who are able to say, hey, it might even be hard for me to make the call to this counselor, and so I really think being able to put yourself in your child's shoes and to say, what can we offer them is so brave for parents who also have that instinct and are saying I don't know if I could do this group, but I want to do this for my kiddo. So I want to acknowledge that.
Absolutely. And I know that, speaking about parents, there are things that they want to do to be able to support their child, their teen. And I know that even if you have kids who get into treatment, who are in either an individual CBT therapy relationship or in a group format, the parents want to know, what can I do at home? What can educators do in the classroom to support a child, a teen who's experiencing social anxiety? Are there things that you say to parents, to educators that they can do to support the treatment of social anxiety?
Absolutely. I think a first step that's really simple is to start to notice when they are really brave, when they are doing things that are hard, whether it's social or not. Just start to pay attention to wow, that was really hard. And I'm so impressed that you did that. And notice that. I think typically parents, teachers, just for sake of time and habit, they notice when they need to sort of address something. Because otherwise we call it letting sleeping dogs lie, right? Otherwise it's it just doesn't come to the top of your radar. But if you were able to say to somebody, hey, I love that if you're a teacher can be I noticed that you were kind to that person and good job. Or if you're a parent who says you were able to, study for that test, even though it was such a drag. I know you're feeling a lot of dread because of it. Good job. That's hard to do because then what you're saying is doing things that are hard can matter and are important. And we're going to start to notice that. So noticing positive, brave, or I think of behaviors that people can approach despite hard emotions. Notice that globally, and you might start to see some shifting. If it's something where you're a teacher, it's a little harder because I think a lot of teachers, and we're working with a lot of teachers at Lumate too and hearing from them. It depends on the teacher and the classroom. But I also think when possible, not catering to the anxiety as much as you might be. We know that students who have social anxiety oftentimes are quiet and teachers don't mind because they're respectful. And so they don't think to push them because they think, well, this is great. They're respectful, they listen. You might still try to have a way to say, hey, listen, you had such a good point with me the other day. I'd love for you to share that. And if it might be they start with another student first, but try to bring them out of the shell and not necessarily cater to, or we think of as accommodate the anxiety. Still call on them every now and then. Maybe call on them when it's an easy question or they know the answer, or you just say, hey, make sure to raise your hand, but it's just something to get them moving towards that. in the classroom. I think for parents, it's tougher. I mean, part of it's the age. It's easy when they're little to be like, hey, if you do this thing, I'm going to give you ice cream after. I remember when my little boy was 3, he'd do anything for like a Band-Aid, like a Band-Aid with stars on it. I could get him to do anything for a Band-Aid. Now he's 12. I'm like, yeah, no more Band-Aids. He needs more cajoling. But I think, again, just really putting some positive attention to things and starting to create situations where, invite them to approach things, because you might have, without realizing it, been accommodating their anxiety. So take a look at things where you're like, wait, am I doing this because I think it's good for them? Or I'm doing this because I don't want to fight, or I don't think they can handle it. Show them that they can and give them those opportunities.
Absolutely. And I love that you mentioned noticing, because again, like you're saying, oftentimes we notice when things are problematic, but it's so important to notice when kids are doing things that show that they're attempting or trying to overcome some of the challenges, or they've worked on something really difficult for them. And the end result is not always going to be an A grade or a positive social experience with another peer. But the fact is that they're working on it, that they've tried. And it sounds like as you notice them practicing some of the things they might be learning in the group CBT class or learning with their therapist, they've called a friend and asked them to come over to praise them for that. Even if the friend says, no, I'm busy on Friday, but they made the call.
Right. I always think find some silver lining, even when they were really struggling, just to say, because I do think that this is not a straight trajectory all the way up the line. People get tired, they get cranky, they get stressed, they just have one of those days. So I think if you're able to really acknowledge them sticking with something, if they can't do an exposure exercise during the week, but they're willing to come back to therapy, then I would notice that. You might be in your mind being like, I spent all this money on this therapy. But a lot of kids could quit. They didn't. So yeah, try to notice. A good way of thinking about it is oftentimes as parents, 80% of our work is on like noticing and disciplining things we don't want to see. And 20% is paying attention to the good things that we like. We want to flip that. Not to say they should get away with everything, but try to have 80% of your time and attention be on showing them and telling them of things that you really are proud of and that you like them doing. And then the 20% on things and areas where you want them to improve.
Absolutely. I love that, flipping the script in that way. Dr. Olivo, thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise with us today and helping us to better understand social anxiety. We've talked about anxiety in general on the podcast before, but this really speaks to social anxiety, which we really haven't discussed. And it is a concern for many parents who have kids and teens who are struggling socially because of social anxiety. So I think what you've done is really help our listeners better understand what it is and to know that there are things that we can do to address it. And it sounds like you and your group do a lot of work in this area. If listeners want to get in touch with you and learn more about social anxiety, CBT, groups for CBT, what is the best way for them to connect with you?
So if you're in the California area, you're in luck because we do have a thriving practice there that's run by Dr. Anna Swan. And you can reach her at anna.swan@lumatehealth.com. And she has beautiful therapists and certainly a social anxiety group that's running over the summer. So I really encourage you to get going if you want to do that, because oftentimes the summer is when you can make some of these things happen, because the school isn't taking up your entire schedule. But we'll run those throughout the year. And she is certainly somebody who can tell you when those are coming up. I think in general, Lumate Health is a national company. We're growing, but right now we have offices in California, the Northeast, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Florida. So if you're in those areas, then just look us up on the website, I think is the simplest, at lumatehealth.com. And that's going to take you very easily to a way to get in touch with the office that's right for you. And you can read more about the people who run those various regions and offices. Our clinicians are all really well trained. They are probably some of the best virtually trained therapists who offer virtual therapy, who offer CBT. They go through rigorous training, weekly supervision. They get case consultation from thought leaders in this field. So you're in really great hands no matter who you end up with.
Wonderful. And I will be sure to put links to Lumate Health and all the other information in the show notes. Dr. Olivo, thank you again for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to check out the show notes where you'll find more information about Dr. Olivo, social anxiety, and group CBT for social anxiety. Also, can I ask you a quick favor? Would you mind sending this episode or just sharing my podcast with 3 of your friends or colleagues? Just 3 of them. I've been working hard to put out valuable information to support families and the professionals who serve them, and I want to be sure these episodes get into the right hands. So if you would be so inclined, you can just click the share button, send it over to a few friends. I would be forever grateful. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.